So the primary way that God is seen throughout the Bible, whether that be the Old or the New Testament, is Father. That's the primary way that he relates to his people. Jesus instructs us when we pray to our Father who is in heaven. We are also supposed to see him as our Father. And as you read through the rest of the New Testament, we are called to relate to each other as brothers and sisters. See, I think family is the key way that we are supposed to understand what it means to be a church, what it means to be a part of the people of God. Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 15, "The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father." Another way to read that would be to say, Daddy. You see, through the death and resurrection of Jesus, we have been adopted into the family of God. We have been brought into this most intimate of relationships. We have been set free from the old way and brought into the safety of family. Now, if family is the primary way that we understand church and the people of God, then some of us and many of us actually have a big problem because we have not seen such great things in our own family. But we read in Matthew chapter 7 verse 11 that God is a good Father. He only gives good gifts to us. He is the best version of what it means to be a father. He is the perfect version of what it means to be a father. So when we are adopted into his family, this is a new kind of family. Sure, we can see pictures and images of it in our own families, but this family is different. This family is secure. You can trust in this family because he is a good father and he looks after his children. So what does it mean to be part of this family? What does it mean to be a child of God? Well, I think there's 4 things that kind of describe this and help us to understand the significance of this for our lives, because it's one thing to say, yeah, you're part of the family of God, but what does it actually mean? The first thing I want to talk about is this idea of identity. Being part of God's family gives us an identity. Jesus tells a story about a father and 2 sons. And if you think about it, it's amazing how many times Jesus uses this picture of family in his parables. There's a father, he has 2 sons. You've probably heard this one before, but the younger son says to himself one day, I want to do things my own way. So he goes to his father and he says, you know what, at one point you're going to be dead in the future and I'm going to receive some inheritance. Can we just fast track that so that I can receive that inheritance right here, right now? Basically saying to his father, I wish you were dead. It doesn't get much more disrespectful than that. Doesn't get much more breaking apart the family than that. But the father is so gracious and he says, sure. And he gives him his share of the inheritance. This son goes away and spends it on lots of different kinds of things. And at some point, he runs out of money. He finds himself so low that he's feeding pigs, wishing so much that he could eat the scraps that he was feeding to these pigs. And so he says to himself, well, my father's servants are doing better than this. I'm going to go back and grovel and apologise and ask to be one of his servants again. So he makes that long walk back, but as he's part way back, his father sees him from a long way off. His father hitches up his clothes and runs and sprints to his son and wraps his arms around him. The son tries to ask for forgiveness, but the father just says, stop. You've always been my son. You will continue to be my son. He puts a ring on his finger, shoes on his feet, and a cloak over his shoulders. In that one act of gracious love, this father reinstates this son's identity. This father had never said to him, I wish you were dead, like he had said to him. This father had always seen him as his son. And the thing that had happened now was this son was ready to be part of the family again. And so the father who represents God wraps his arms around him and reinvites him back into the family. Now he's back. He carries his father's name. When you are part of a family, you carry the name of that family. Now this son carries his father's name once again. When we choose to enter into the family of God, when we choose to be part of God's people, we carry his name. We carry his name on ourselves. We receive the identity of what it means to be a son and a daughter of God. So the second thing I want to talk about when it comes to family is this idea of love. Families are supposed to be a place of love. Jesus says in John 13:34 and 35 that if people want to know who my people are, if you want to be someone who is known as one of my people, as one of my disciples, as part of my family, then you're supposed to love one another. That's how people will know. If they look at you and see that you're a great lover, that you love so many people, you're so generous with your time and your resources, and your compliments and your encouragements, then I think maybe that guy, maybe that person is a Jesus person. And it makes sense, right? I mean, Jesus was someone who showed great love, great compassion to pretty much everyone and anyone who came at him with an open heart and open hands. He showed love to. He cared for the sick and the poor and the outcasts and the women and anyone and everyone who was kind of not seen as good enough. Jesus gave so much of himself to those people. So if he's part of our family, if we share his name and his identity, then we are supposed to be someone who looks a lot like him. In the same way that I expect my daughters, some of them look a lot like me, because they are part of my family. We are called to look a lot like Jesus does. And this has been evident throughout church history, to see that how Christians have kind of got together and been generous and set up hospitals and set up orphanages and schools and all this kind of thing. Why? So that they can show love to people around them, so that they can show that identity of who Jesus is in and through them. And of course, this has not always been the case. I mean, you read some letters even in the Bible written to a church that were not showing love very well at all, particularly the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians. And that's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13 about what love looks like. Love looks like patience and kindness and goodness and self-control. I encourage you to have a look at it. We as a people of God, we as the family of God are called to be a people that show that same kind of love that Jesus showed to us throughout his ministry, and particularly and most significantly on the cross. So sacrificial, so generous, and so gracious. No one really understands who you are quite like your family do they? I mean, your family have been there since you were born. They've seen you at your worst, they've seen you at your best, and you have also seen them at their worst and at their best. And in the midst of this, there's this kind of understanding. I'm not sure if this is true or if it's just my kind of understanding of it, but there is this understanding that you've got a lot of dirt on each other. And so that if anyone from your family ever decided that they were going to share some of this dirt with the wider world, you had a whole kind of arsenal of dirt that you could throw back at them. It's this understanding, this idea of mutually assured destruction. If you're going to get me, then I've got a lot on you. But all jokes aside, there's this idea and understanding in a family of trust, isn't there? That you trust each other because you have to. You kind of been put together as a family and you have to trust each other. You have to understand that each other has each other's backs. And when there is breakdown in family, it's often because there's been a breakdown in trust. But when we talk about what it means to be part of God's family, we can trust God's family because we can trust Him. That doesn't mean we're always going to get it right, but it does mean that we trust that each other has each other's best interest at heart. Talking about the last image of love, we trust each other that we are loved by each other. And because of that, we can be comfortable. We can feel safe. We can feel like we have a home, somewhere that we can be who we really are, not who we think that everyone thinks that we should be. There shouldn't be any pretense in the family of God. Why? Because we can trust. So we've had identity, love, trust, and the final thing I want to say is belonging. Everybody needs a place to belong, a tribe to be part of, and a family to belong to. Not everyone has this sense, this understanding, this place that they can belong, to be accepted, to have a place to go, to have a place where they can feel safe and comfortable. As a church, we should be a place where people feel like they belong, and we should be extending this understanding of belonging to the community around us. People should walk in and we should immediately kind of put our arms around them and say, this is home, welcome to the family. You now have a place to belong. Why? Because God welcomed us into his family, so we should be a people that welcome others into our family, which is ultimately his family anyway. A place to belong. So this whole understanding, this whole idea of relating to each other through the lens of family is pretty radical in the world around us. Most other organisations or groups of people relate to each other dependent on what others can contribute to the group, or how much they have, or what they do, or what they look like. We don't value people because of what they bring to the party. We value people because of who they are as God's children. I want to ask you to spend the next little while just talking about some of your experiences of being part of church family. Share some testimonies about how God has used church community, church family around you to impact your life. And maybe even have a conversation about what would you like to see as part of our church family? What are some of the aspects of family that you would like to see become more real for you in our church family? I hope you've been blessed by this week, and I'll talk to you next time.